Hello, my name is Jamie Younger. Welcome to the Story Keep podcast, Who We Remember. On this show, I speak with a wide variety of guests about one family member's life story that they would love to have documented on film. Whether that person is living or now deceased, we explore their essence, their spirit, and share some of their incredible life stories and surprising histories. Most of us think too late about capturing the stories of our loved ones. These conversations elevate, honor, and speak to one person's lasting influence. I promise that you will walk away feeling empowered and challenged, and hopefully inspired anew to think about your own life and the impact that you want to make. Today, I am joined by Bryn Monahan, a distinguished family enterprise consultant. Her journey intertwines with the extraordinary life of her maternal aunt, Elaine Hashimi. Bryn's aunt Elaine was deaf in one ear from birth. Raised Jewish, Elaine married a Muslim man from Afghanistan. Before we fully step into Elaine's story, let me introduce you to my guest, Bryn. Bryn Monahan is a family enterprise consultant. She's an expert in communication, leadership, and planning for the future of family enterprises. Bryn sits on the boards of Foster Holdings, Inc. and FAM Legacy Solutions. Before that, she led a family investment group called 5/4. Bryn grew up in Houston, Texas, and later Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. As a kid, Bryn loved to climb trees and swim and play basketball. Basically, she was always on the move, and she is still doing that today. I'm really looking forward to introducing you to Bryn in this way and the special relationship that she has with her aunt, Elaine. Let's dive in. Bryn, I'm so happy to have this time to sit down with you and talk with you about your aunt, Elaine.
I'm excited to be here.
Yeah. So just to start us off, can you tell us about your aunt, who she, where on your family side she was, and also paint a picture for us of when you think of her, what was she doing? What was she saying? What scene would you find her in?
Oh gosh. So my aunt, Elaine Hashimi, Elaine Kasowski, I don't know her middle name, if her middle name was Kasowski, if she moved her maiden name to her middle name, but Kasowski is my mother's side of the family. So she is my mom's older sister. She's actually 10 years older than my mom. So pretty big age difference, but they were very close. I think partially because, my mom looked up to her older sister, but also because my mom felt protective of her sister. My Aunt Elaine was completely deaf in one ear and mostly deaf in the other ear. And because of that was treated as though she was different, as though she wasn't very smart. Kids made fun of her, and she couldn't hear it, but so my mom's relationship with my aunt is really, I think, why I was so captivated by her when she was living. Unfortunately, she passed away a couple of years ago in 2021. But Elaine, so she was born in January 1944 and lived until September 2021. So she had, a pretty long life. And considering the the world threw everything at this woman. Truly, she was, practically deaf from, very young age. And she had cancer. She was one of the first people that I personally knew, maybe the first person that I really personally knew, because I was so young when she was first diagnosed with cancer. She was diagnosed with breast cancer probably in her 40s, which means I would have been 10-ish, in that age range. And she was diagnosed with stage 4 breast cancer and metastatic breast cancer, and not given very long to live. And she managed to live quite a long time. So I think in and of itself, that says a lot about a person. She was not willing to let the doctors tell her, you aren't going to live very long. And again, this was a while back. This is probably in the maybe 80s or early 90s which means she was not, the treatments then were very different from the treatments now. And she really lived through a lot. Ultimately, cancer is unfortunately what ended up causing her passing. It had metastasized, honestly, everywhere, but eventually to her brain. And while she had had a number of tumors removed, eventually they just couldn't do any more. But when I think of her, I never think about cancer, even though it was sort of clear that she wasn't sort of well. She wore one of those sleeves on her arm to help with her circulation. I don't know if you've ever seen them, but she always wore really fun colors and like matched her outfits. At one point, we thought about getting her like a tattoo, to like a fake tattoo sleeve to put over the sleeve. Her hair was, obviously often very short from different bouts of chemo. But again, that's not really how I think of her. She was, for her lack of hearing, etc., one of the most vibrant and really extroverted people I knew, and was always wanted to have people over to her house, always wanted to have, a party. There was never a bad excuse for a party. And so, I really just, when I think of her as being like the life of the party, walking around, making sure, people are talking, and, she spoke directly to you because she couldn't hear you otherwise. She never learned sign language. So she really mostly lip read, which meant when she was talking to you, she was talking to you.
She was with you.
She was with you. You didn't talk to, she wasn't talking to anybody else. You weren't looking around. Like, you had to look right at her and make sure that you were really articulating your words. And so that's sort of, how I think of her, I guess, is, being a little louder, being really close, about my speech. But she always wanted to know what was going on in all of our lives. She hated to be out of the know. I think fear of missing out, that FOMO, as we now call it. She was the original person that had FOMO. She wanted to do everything and be everywhere and do all the things.
Do you imagine that was inspired because of her deafness, or do you imagine that that's just who she would have been anyway?
That's an excellent question. I think it's who she would have been anyways. To me, it's a hard thing to separate because, she was deaf. But I think she would have wanted to be, she was the extrovert in the group. My mom is considerably more introverted. I think their brother, who's in between the two of them, is sort of, he's probably leans more extroverted also. But she really she was like an oldest daughter, she got things done. She wanted to be in it. As an oldest daughter, I'm not exactly extroverted myself, but she just wanted to be there, wanted to be present, wanted to be with people. She loved to be surrounded by other people. That definition of extroversion, of getting your energy from other people, like that was for sure who she was. And I don't think that would have been different. No.
You shared something that really struck me, that she grew up Jewish and ended up marrying a Muslim man from Afghanistan.
Yeah.
The story of that? I don't know if that seems like something that, had you had the chance to record her life story, would have been key.
Yeah. So it's a really, so I don't know the details. And I think that this is one of the reasons that when you ask the question of whose life story would you want recorded, hers is the answer for me, because she was so interesting and she had so many things that were interesting about her life, and this being a really big one. So I'm not exactly sure how she met her husband, but I did learn that they met in Tucson, Arizona. So it may have been college, because I believe they both went to school in Tucson, and the age, that sounds about right. They got married in 1967, and they moved back to Afghanistan. I'm presuming that my uncle Shireen, her husband, had to go back to Afghanistan, or chose to. He came from a relatively large family himself, and they moved there right after they got married.
So she moved to Afghanistan. Wow.
Moved to Afghanistan with him. And they actually had their first child in Afghanistan very soon after they got married, which I also didn't know until I did a little bit more digging. So my oldest cousin was born in 1967 in Afghanistan. They didn't stay long, but they had made a pact, she and Shireen, he being Muslim and she growing up pretty Jewish. Like my family was relatively observant on that side of the family. You know, she grew up keeping kosher in the home, going to synagogue every weekend, you know, nothing crazy, you know, she wasn't like wearing, you know, wigs or long clothing or anything like that. They weren't Orthodox, but they were pretty observant. And, you know, she married from my understanding, a relatively observant Muslim man. And so they made a pact that if they were living in Afghanistan, that they would practice Islam. And if they moved back to the United States, that they would be Jewish. And that's exactly what they did. They didn't live in Afghanistan for very long, maybe 2 years tops, before it just was not a great place to be living. Although in the late 60s, probably better than maybe any other time in history. But they moved back to the United States and settled in Phoenix, which is where she's from. And they became Jewish, and they had a Jewish household. They, you know, were less observant than my grandparents were in the sense of not necessarily keeping kosher in the home, but they still, you know, all the Jewish traditions, holidays, going to services. Their eldest son actually became ultra Orthodox Jew. And so, you know, very interesting sort of flow of what happened in their lives.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I will say one thing I do know, and I've always found this really interesting, is that when they were talking about it, what they realized is there are a lot of similarities between the two religions. Like, for example, some of the food related things. So no pork, for example, that's consistent across both religions. How we deal with death is actually very consistent across both religions. In both religions, you bury your dead quickly. Typically within 24 hours, 48 hours, sort of at the most. And there are sort of other similarities, which shouldn't come as a huge surprise, but I think for people that don't know that, the similarities between being Muslim and being Jewish, there's a lot of them. So, yeah.
Right. I think in many people's minds, and to be honest, in mine, that they would be so completely different. But yeah, those are pretty, important parts of daily life and rites of passage, and very interesting. And they had 3 children together,
3 biological children,
and then a 4th,
and an adopted son. So they had 3 children: Yusuf, who goes by Yosef, Rachel, and Sadiqa. And Elaine's best friend had 2 children, and I think I'm getting this right, that they were killed in a car accident, and they had an older daughter.
Your aunt's
best friend. Sorry, yes, my aunt's best friend, and her husband. I believe they were killed in a car crash. What I do know is that they were both killed. I believe it was a car crash. That part I may be wrong about, but I know that they were both killed. And the older daughter was over 18. The younger son was in high school age range. I'm not exactly sure exactly how old he was, but they adopted him. And he's, you know, went on to become a doctor, but he had probably on the spectrum, maybe some difficulties, especially at that time frame. So that was quite the addition. They didn't exactly make a ton of money. My aunt was an accountant, but mostly freelance. And my uncle, though well-educated, moving back to the States, being a Muslim man, had a very hard time finding consistent work. So that was a big ask, but it was never a question at the same time. And that was the kind of people that they were. That was certainly the kind of person she was. So not even a question. And they raised Michael from that time on. And Michael's children, you know, refer to her as Bubby, which is the Hebrew word for grandmother. So, you know, very much. Yeah.
Yeah. Beautiful. You expressed that part of the reason that you would want to document Elaine's life story, and there are, I'm sure, many people you considered as, and not that you wouldn't want everyone, in your family's story recorded, but I'm curious if it had to do with sort of her mental toughness, or what makes her stand out for you, and how has she actually kind of impacted your life or the way you want to live your life?
Yeah, I think there are two reasons. One is certainly the mental toughness, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But I think the first is actually the impact she had on our family and on my mom and the I guess I would love to capture her story. I wish we had captured her story, her voice, for my family, for my mom. This is obviously going to be emotional, but because they were so close, and we want to be able to tell her story and tell the story of all those things that she overcame, but also just have her voice, have her, have that encapsulated somewhere. And we do have some videos here and there because of all those parties, things like that. But, I think that was part of why I thought of her first, was this sense of what it could be for my family, not just for me. It was not just about me. It was about my family and what she meant to them, what she meant to her daughters. I'm pretty close with my cousins, and just the way that they speak about her. It's for that I thought capturing her felt right. And I can't really do that because I'm not her. In fact, they'd probably be better at it. But I think that's why she was top of my mind. The other side of that is that part of the reason she's so important to me and to my family is certainly related to her mental toughness. I mean, she was not going to let anything put her down. Can't hear you, doesn't matter. I'm going to figure it out. I mean, she was one of the first people I knew that had a sort of talk to text type of app for her computer, because her phone would literally plug into her computer. Terrible technology back in the day. But, she was one of the first people because she was freelance. So she did a lot of her work over the phone. She couldn't hear you. So, she had so cell phones were brilliant for her because she could text people more quickly. It was really helpful. But she wasn't going to let any of that get her down. And I think that sense of perseverance certainly is something that most of us could really use some of. So when you see that, and then, with the cancer element, yeah, I mean, that woman traveled even if she was super sick, so sick. I mean, she shouldn't have come to my wedding. She didn't even know it was a wedding. My wedding was a surprise wedding. So she didn't even know it was a wedding. She
think she was coming to
an engagement party.
Hey, and it turned into a wedding.
Yes.
And there she was.
And there she was. So, she just didn't let things get her down. And I think that sort of zest for life really was a big driver for her, maybe more so than the mental toughness. It was really just wanting to live every moment and wanting to really just absorb the world and be a part of it, and not let all of these, things that other people might call ailments or disabilities get her down. So I really have always admired that about her, and that's how we remember her. I mean, it's, just a super fun loving woman.
Can you pinpoint, and maybe you can, maybe you can't, how her life and who she was impacted who you've become, or the life that you're trying to lead, or you are leading?
That's a good question also. So this is a sort of weird thing about me. So I'm not wearing any of my family jewelry right now, but I often do. And when I wear pieces of jewelry from my family, I often feel their presence a little bit more. And I don't really I don't know how I feel about the afterlife and whatnot. But it's sort of all right, I'm putting you on, I'm putting the bracelet on, I'm putting you on. And I actually don't have any of Elaine's jewelry, but I tell you that because I feel like there's a way in which there's certain elements that I go through my life and I'm like, well, like, it's like, what would Elaine do? How would she, what choice would she make? Like, what would she say about like saying no to that thing that, I'm tired, but it seems really fun. What those kinds of things I think are ways that that I think about her. The other way that I think she's impactful in my life ongoing is in the relationships that I have with my mom's side of the family. Because I come from a entrepreneur or a business owning family on my dad's side of the family, the shared economy puts us in closer contact than most families. And I don't have that on my mom's side of the family. And so it's easier for those relationships to go by the wayside in comparison to the side of my family that has that shared economy where we're sort of forced, if you will, into engaging. And so I think Elaine's impact is that I want to make sure that I'm staying in connection with my cousins and particularly her daughters who I'm pretty close with. But really that extended family and, make sure that I'm spending that same time with that family. And that to me is very important part of, I'm sure she would really want that. And I know that she would want that. She wants people to join together and come together. So that's, I think, where she's really impacted me is that sense of familyness and wanting to be with my family and prioritizing my family over pretty much anything else.
Yeah.
Not everybody does that. Some people
No,
not at all.
Not at all.
But I feel like I really do prioritize my family. So
yeah. Do you have a sense of where that came from for her? What that sprang from? Was it her Jewish roots in some particular way, or was that your mom's side of the family in general and your grandparents?
Well, I think I'm very lucky that both sides of my family are very family oriented. That said, and family comes first. Some families you might see some cutoffs here or there, siblings that don't talk to each other, people choose not to talk to their parents. That is just not an option in my family. And you'd really have to like murder someone, I think. I'm not kidding. Like there's just we don't do that in our family. It's just not on either side. We really just don't do that. That said, I think for Elaine, the driver actually may have had to do a little bit with her deafness, the driver to be around people that she felt close to. So she, family gatherings would sometimes include her closer friends because they sort of became a part of the family. And I think that desire to be around people that welcomed her with open arms, because she wasn't always welcomed with open arms. And despite the fact that she seemed to sort of not care, I don't think anybody can kind of go through life not caring that it feels like people don't want to be friends with you because of a disability or any other reason. So I think there's an element of her that she wanted to be with the people that she knew loved her. And so she wanted to be around the people she loved. So I think that was probably part of it.
Yeah.
That's a guess, but I think it's probably a good one.
Yeah, we don't know since we can't ask her, but we'll extrapolate from her life. Is there any other part of Elaine's legacy that's in your mind and in your heart that you still feel like you haven't fully expressed, or you kind of want to live out or interpret that as you will?
I think her love of travel and things like that, that I don't know that I necessarily would tie that specifically to her, but I do think that that sense of not letting things that might otherwise get in your way, whether that's related to, where you're traveling, when you're traveling, how you're interacting with other people. I think that sense of not letting life get in your way of living is really the most important.
Yeah. Yeah. And finally, if you had the chance to talk to her again, what do you think you would say?
I love you. I don't know. I would just give her a hug. I loved her hugs. She was a good hugger. But you had to hug her on the right side, because if you were going to talk while you were hugging, she couldn't hear you. I don't know that I would want to say anything else. I was there when she died with my family. But kind of purposely left the room because I knew she was going to pass, and made my dad come with me so that she could be with just her daughters and my mom. Actually, all three of her kids were there, and my mom. And I didn't want to be in the room for that. I felt like that was for them, but I just want to give her a hug. That's it. And tell her I love her.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for sharing Elaine with me. And with everyone who's listening and watching in. I think what I take for myself from the story of her life is whatever it is that you have that could be seen as a disability by others, or like within yourself that maybe others don't even know about, that it's almost like she leveraged it instead of being held back by it. And I'm really inspired by that.
Yeah. She told herself a positive story instead of a negative story. And that is something for sure to live by, is that we get to choose the story we tell ourselves about our circumstances. And she told a positive one. And so can we. We can all do that. We can all tell a positive story.